Welcome to this video, which is a bit different from what you're used to of my videos on this channel. Normally I produce all sorts of PowerPoint videos on the wonderful material that Robert Schmidt and Alan Black produced. But now I'm interviewing a very special person, and she's special because she has become the custodian of the material of Robert Schmidt and Alan Black. Because, as you know, they both passed away some time ago. And the happy news is that Project Hindsight will continue under supervision of Kathryn Higson, the person you see here in the screen. And we're going to have a talk about the work that she will be doing and how she met Robert and Alan, etc., etc. So it's a bit different than what you're used to, but we will be certain that this will be of interest to you. So, hello, Katie. Welcome to
Thanks for
this
having me.
interview. Well,
Thank you for
thank
having
you
me.
for letting me interview you.
Mm.
So, it's a big topic to address. So, let's start at the beginning in the sense of how you met Robert and Alan Black, because these are the persons that produce all this wonderful material. But how did you get involved with them?
Well, so I met Alan and Bob, as I know him, in 2000. Bob was giving a lecture at a local vintage theater called the Embassy Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And Alan had gone to high school with a guy named Mark Baker, who had recently bought the theater and was restoring it. And because they were friends, Bob had agreed to do some lectures down there on philosophy as,
Mm-hmm.
to promote the theater and everything like that. And there was a little blurb in the newspaper about, that he was going to be giving a lecture. Um, and in the blurb, I noticed that he had gone to St. John's College, which is also where I had gone. And
Ah.
St. John's is a really small school, and it's special because they teach what's called the Great Books of Western Civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And and so because of that, it's a really small community among alumni too. We call ourselves Johnnies, and anyone that went to St. John's, if you would run into them, you would definitely want to talk to them. So I
Mm-hmm.
knew that I wanted to go to the lecture right away. And of course I went, and it was packed. And I just remember being very interested. It wasn't about astrology at all. It was about I don't even remember, it was 24 years ago now, what it was exactly about. But I
Mm-hmm.
remember just feeling like, oh, but this guy he's the real deal. He was really
Mm-hmm.
interested. And it was funny because a lot of the audience questions, I felt like they didn't really get what he was doing, because I think so many people think philosophy is boils down somehow to like religion or politics. So many of the
Mm-hmm.
questions were about religion or politics, and that wasn't really what he was going after at all. But I'm sure many people really enjoyed it. And afterwards, I introduced myself to Ellen,
Mm-hmm.
and so she said, "Oh, you have to come over. Come over for tea." Ellen was a big tea time kind of person, so she
Mm-hmm.
invited me over for tea, and they were living in her childhood home on Washington Street in Cumberland, which was just a very, very large mansion on Washington Street here in Cumberland that she had grown up in and had inherited from her mother after her mother had passed. And they used that. I don't know how long before I met them they had moved there exactly, but they lived there then for over another decade. And it was a really great area for them to host people and have
Mm-hmm.
conferences. I mean, everything, the larger conference that they had in 2006, they rented out a big hall downtown for, but everything else was done in their house. So they had, like, when you walked in, it was actually a duplex mansion. So you would walk in, and then off to the left, there was the door that went on, like the left side of the house. And it was just this really large living room, sitting area with a fireplace. And that's where, she would have me over for tea and biscuits, whatever. And there was like a back room. And then off to the side, there was just this absolutely gorgeous sunroom. And that was huge. It was every bit as big as the living room, and it had just like this leaded glass with just gorgeous fine detail and natural
Mm-hmm.
light, and behind that was a kitchen. so when they would have people, they just had these white chairs that they had, seemed like an endless supply of white chairs with like a blue cushion on them, and they would just line them up. Like, I mean, and just like it was a lecture hall, you know, and people would sit, and Bob had his little microphone and his table at the front, and then that back room behind the living room is where the recording equipment would be. And so yeah, that was in 2000 when I first met them, and I would go over, you know, and visit with Ellen. And I really didn't get to know Bob that well at first, because he would sort of come through, he would work then in his office that was upstairs, and actually on the other side of the house. So he would come through, and you had to kind of like walk in then to the entryway, and then back to the other side of the duplex, and he would tear through, say, "Hello, Katie," and get his tea or whatever he was getting, and he would practically power walk back to his office. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anyone more driven. So, and
yeah,
that I know now that was when he was just really in the height of his reconstruction project with the Hellenistic Astrology, and you know, having completed the 16-volume translation set, you know, from the 90s, he was now working on you know, his restoration. So
how did you become more involved with them as your friends?
Yeah, so then they would invite me to things. They would have people over too. So like when they would do their weekends, I realize now that I was at what is called Saturnalia, and I remember because she had invited me to. It was for New Year's I was at 2000 going into 2001, I think. And I remember, of course, I don't have an astrology background, and I remember Bob talking about the nature, just my memory of it is him talking about the nature of Venus and what that Greek word really meant. What is the Greek meaning of the word, you know, to you know, set your heart upon something. And I just, the influence that had on me in terms of like understanding what he was really up to, you know, that he was really going for the roots of this system, and to understand what the scaffolding underneath of it really was. And so I really enjoyed that. It reminded me, I mean, it was just such a St. John's thing to do, such a Johnny kind of endeavor. And I just really enjoyed going to the different workshops and lectures that they would have there. But not having an astrology background, you know, I would get often lost in the technical language of the astrology itself, but it was still so fascinating to me to be there, because what he was doing was so much more than that, because it was like watching him kind of go through that process of uncovering this underlying meaning. And that's really what fascinated me all along. And I think that, you know, when we got to know my husband as well, we got to know Bob better as, you know, as those first few years as time went on. And in 2006, I remember being at the conclave that they had that year that was downtown. And I remember vividly him talking about, you know, that he felt that there was essentially like a deeper esoteric meaning embedded in the astrological system itself. And that just really fascinated me. And but I kept up with them, you know, as friends. I did not become a practicing astrologer. That wasn't my thing. And in fact, professionally, they introduced me to Matthew Wood, who then became another teacher of mine. And as I pursued a career in body work and craniosacral therapy, and sort of had my own trajectory of inquiry that I was doing. And I've been blessed to find a couple amazing teachers. But it was interesting because the nature of the inquiry is what was so special about Bob's work and also Ellen's work. And that was something that we talked about a lot. And I remember when I was really getting deep into my work and my inquiry about how how it is that we are informed in our bodies and our consciousness, and how that plays out in ways that might not show up on, like an anatomy chart or something like that. And I remember talking to Bob about that specifically, and he said, yeah, the material you're studying, if you're doing it right, the material you're studying changes you so that you can understand it. And wow. Yeah, and I remember talking to them about that, and that willingness to be changed by what they would call the problem that you're studying. The problem, but to be willing to be changed by the thing that you're studying is so key. Yeah. To be willing
amazing.
to be changed by it so that you yourself can understand it, and to really be informed by it. And so yeah, we continue to know each other and be good friends, good family friends, like we would have them over for dinner, or visit. My husband wasn't as available as I was, but if it was like a weekend, and we would have them over for dinner sometimes. Ellen in particular, like she came to she like wouldn't miss a dance recital or Christmas program, or a birthday. She was at all the birthday parties, and we'd always pack a plate for Bob and send a plate home for Bob. And I met so many interesting people at that mansion too. I mean, that was one of the just amazing things. It was like meeting people from all over the world who were just so interesting and so fun to socialize with, and be with and spend time with. And that house itself too was just such a great gathering place and such a great party house, and I spent a lot of time sort of like, it was one of those mansions you could just kind of like investigate every nook and cranny, and it was like the downstairs, there were like 2 basement levels, and we could hardly call them basement because it's on a hill. So then the lower level opened up to this back porch that was just massive, and you would just have, massive gatherings after the lectures, after the weekend intensive, whatever it was they were calling it. And Bob spent a lot of time on that back porch. And then he also had a little office down there too, and they kept their library down there. It was sort of like an open, of course, like I say basement, but it's like hardwood floors and gorgeous like inside boxes. And I mean, just to stand in the library and just look at the mountains of books and what they had, I mean, it was just really special. And so when my kids were younger, I had a daughter that was born, or two daughters that were born sort of in that time period. So if I would want to go visit, we kept a bin of toys, so we had like the toys that were there that were like, Bob and Ellen's toys. And so that they always had something to do. And then they would play hide and seek. It was a great house for playing hide and seek.
Oh, great. Yeah.
But
so what happened after they both had passed away? Because I understood that they had to move house at a certain point.
Yeah. So the contour of socializing with them really changed. At some point in the mid 2000s, Bob was working, he had been working all of this out of how to restore, reconstructing the Hellenistic system. As you know, I mean, he had these long, sprawling lectures, that would be like a 15-hour lecture or something like that, where he's really parsing it through. And what he was working on at that time was putting together what he would call like a basic course that would just be like all of the techniques that he had uncovered all in one place. And he was working on that, and he was piloting it. And unfortunately, they had a really bad experience where that course was appropriated and published without their permission. And so when Bob saw that, I mean, he wrote about it. I've seen some of his writings about this experience that they had, where he said it read flat. It was like looking at a lifeless image of yourself or something like that. And he didn't like it. I mean, he very much, it was devastating to them because I think it read very much as a violation to them, but it also changed their direction, because at that time, Bob made the decision that he didn't want to put it out like that, because it felt like, sort of seeing it reflected back to him, felt like sort of like a bag of tricks had just been kind of like lifted off,
Okay. Yeah.
And that with that, the embodiment of it was, what's the word, compromised, and he didn't want any parts of it anymore. And so he basically put himself back to the drawing board. And over the next few, like after that period of time, really brought a different type of vibe to what they had going on. They no longer had big events. There were no longer people. And I think they were much more cautious about sharing what they were doing, And so then it became different. It was like just their inner circle. If it was somebody that was visiting with them, you knew that it was somebody else that was in their absolute inner circle. And at that time, I would say like post 2010 is really in many ways when their work really got, I mean, you didn't really think their work could get any better, but it did. Because what happened is they began developing and really hitting upon what they had been after all along, which is the esoteric roots of Western astrology, right? And so, I mean, you're familiar because they did publish on this, but they were very choosy about, I think that the piece that they put out in 2011, I think they sent to just about anybody that would order it. But from 2015, there were like 3 more parts to that course that were published. And I think they were pretty choosy about who they sent it to, just sending it to their core group. And when I would go over and talk to them, especially with their sort of core discovery that Western astrology had not originated in a Hellenistic system, in the Hellenistic era, but had in fact originated in the classical period, meaning like Plato and Aristotle's own time.
Right.
That it was actually a product of Athenian philosophy is a major, major discovery of interest to any historian of science, any classicist, as well as any traditional astrologer. And so, they would swear you to secrecy, and for their proofs for this. And I know I would be at Herbal weekends with Matthew Wood, and we would be talking about Ellen and Bob and how amazing their research was. And, people would say, oh, what are they working on? I would be like, we can't tell you. Yeah. So, I mean, I very much have that in my consciousness, which is something that I've really had to sit with this past year of how I then distribute their later work. But anyway, so, but in many ways, our friendship with them then became even more intimate after that, because it was just, sort of just us guys, and then they did have to move. It was very unfortunate. I don't think anybody would accuse Ellen and Bob of being good business people. And they lost that house. And then they rented another house on Cumberland Street in Cumberland. And they just kept working. I mean, they just kept working away. I mean, they just were as driven as ever. And every time you'd go over, Bob always had his whiteboard out. And he always worked on a whiteboard, and he always had it set up in their main living area. And when you go over, if you were lucky, he would start going on the whiteboard and showing you what he was up to. Wow. And so they had that board, they had that set up there, and he did some of the other recordings there too. I know he did the 2015 Eudoxus Files course that I just released on the streaming site. And he released the house systems conversations from that house. And and he may have done, I think he did part 3 and 4 there as well. And then another unfortunate thing happened, which is the person that they were renting that house from decided to sell that house. And so they had to move yet again. And at this point, I mean, the move was really brutal for them, especially from the mansion to Cumberland Street. I helped them with that move a good bit. I had a minivan at that time, and just minivan load by minivan load. And they never did get a U-Haul or anything. And we had a couple other friends that helped them cart things
Okay.
over, but
Yeah.
it was depleting for them. I
Mm.
mean, they were already, I mean, Bob was already in his 60s by then, and it was depleting. And then for them to have to move again
Yeah.
was
I
really
can
unfortunate.
understand. Yeah.
It was really unfortunate. Yeah. And so, but they were able to find this house and actually purchase it. And let's see. And so I think that was 2017 that they moved here. And
Okay.
it was not long after that that Bob realized that he was sick. And the only way I can say it is he never set up his whiteboard here.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
So
1 year later, he passed away because it's 2017 you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, he
He
passed
passed
away.
December 2018. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
so
So what happened? Because when Ellen passed away, which was in exactly a year ago in the month of May, right?
yes,
What
almost exactly.
then you became, well, sort of the custodian. How did that work? Did you know that they were planning on having you as the majordomus taking care of all their material?
Yes, I did know that. And
Okay.
so in fact it was it's a very straightforward legal process of,
Okay.
so my husband and myself are the beneficiaries
Okay.
to the estate. And so they had always trusted us. Often they had wanted to talk to us about, my husband has some experience with business consulting, and
Okay.
he's started a couple businesses, and just has knowledge of how to structure things. And so
Okay.
they would ask him for advice, or how they should, do a certain thing or something
Mm,
like that. And in general, they very much trust his judgment, just on those basics of like how something should be structured, or how to lay something out. And as for the both of us together, we're trusted friends. And I think that they knew that we would have their best interests at heart
mm.
in terms of preserving their legacy, because
Yeah.
what
Great.
I'm
Yeah.
doing is basically is legacy work.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so I did know. And I guess I will say I wasn't looking forward to it, because I knew I wouldn't be doing it until Ellen died. And like, that's not something, I mean, I was really hoping that I had more time with her, even though she
Mm,
was almost 80, and she was in lifelong poor health. I was, it's really remarkable that she lived to almost 80, considering her
right.
lifelong
Yeah.
asthma, which was really quite terrible. Um,
Mm,
but so yeah, I knew I would be doing this eventually. And
mm.
and I definitely feel very strongly that it's my great honor to do it. And I also feel like it's I don't know why this opened. It feels very much like an honor to me to do
Mm.
it. So I'm happy to do it.
And so
I'm
are
not
we.
happy that the time has come. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Can you tell us something specific about Ellen's work? Because she was always a bit in the background, and we all know that she contributed to the work that Bob was doing. So was there any specific topic that she was more interested in, or can you tell us something about that?
Yeah. So it's really funny, because I have been going back through and listening to some of Bob's earlier work with the
Mm,
phase lectures. And so I'm kind of closer with them now. And it's really funny to listen to, because, and I don't know if you recall this, because maybe it's been a while since you've listened to the phase lectures,
mm.
but tell me if you recall, where Bob will be talking about some Greek word, and then Ellen will chime in and say, oh, well, the number for that word is this important number. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
also like to there is this talk about the Hellenistic, the seven hermetic parts, and then he's talking about how he had his first date with Ellen, and how and how she responded to that. That was really funny because
Oh my gosh.
he said, well, because his lot of errors, that's the part having to do with Venus, which has to do with love, is in
Yeah.
aversion to the love. And then he says, well, when that is the case, then you don't have a clue about when somebody is getting on to you. And Ellen at that time invited him for dinner, and then he was done with dinner and then said, and now I have to go and study some more. So he had no clue about what was going on. That was such a funny story. So yeah, and she was really chiming in that lecture as well. So yeah, that's great. It
Yeah,
was
like I
really
know
funny.
at one point she's saying like, and she'll make these comments like, well, the word for Namos has the same number as the word for Arithmos, and so that's important that they're tagging those
Okay.
words. And so that was something that she had been interested in for a long time, and
Okay.
she continued to work on that, and that's called gematria. Mostly people that are familiar with gematria are looking at it from a biblical standpoint. There's a lot of gematria and I think the Bible, and not a lot of work has been done with ancient Greek gematria. Now,
Okay.
it's well known that the Greeks did this. So I remember even knowing this at St. John's, that alpha equals 1, beta equals 2, gamma equals 3, and so on. There's a formula for it, so that each letter also equals a number, and so that in that way the language becomes dimensioned in that way, because you're referencing a number every time you're referencing a word as well. We don't have that or anything like that in English. And I remember hearing about that, and it was like, but nothing ever is just like, it sticks out to me that it was like well known, but it wasn't. I don't remember anybody ever saying like, oh, and here's this scholarship where somebody really took a deep dive on how this plays out in the Greek philosophy. And I don't think anyone has really done that as deeply as what Ellen has. And so, like when Bob says in the Eudoxus files, for example, part 2 of the basic course, the last section of that, which is called mathematical calculations, and he goes through these really detailed mathematical calculations that demonstrates that the deific names for the planets were chosen to fit certain mathematical principles. So you remember that. You remember that part, right?
Yeah. I'm not good at math, so these are the parts that I mostly skip over.
Okay, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of that course, he says, we have discovered this. And when I say we, I'm referring to myself and my wife, Ellen Black. The portion of with the mathematical calculations, he's mostly reporting on Ellen's work in that. When he says myself with my wife Ellen, that's what he's referring to as her work, the Greek gematria. And it was like, it's really detailed, and it's shocking, because what she essentially uncovered is that all of this astrology was created not only for the purposes that we already know, but with the specific purpose of embedding these Pythagorean mathematical principles into the system itself. And they did that through gematria. And one of the other things that she would talk to me about, and I wish I remembered the exact reference of who said this, and I'll find it. I'll re-listen to some recordings that I have with her, and I'll discover where it is. But somewhere it was said the Greeks language wasn't adequate to transfer the Egyptian knowledge into.
Okay.
So it had to be, and so the idea then is it had to be modified, and that's probably where this gematria came in order to allow the transfer of the Egyptian knowledge, because it was said specifically the Greek language wasn't capable of
Wow.
holding that information. And
Wow.
so that's very much what she was working on. And like I had referenced earlier, I've really sat with I mean, my husband and myself both, how I'm going to put this forward and what does her the most honor, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm so much in the mindset of like, okay, I've been sworn to secrecy, even to have like described to you the nature of her work.
Mm-hmm.
I would not have felt that was my place until like very recently,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so but what I'm aware of is that I need to find a way forward to get her work out there, because it's important and I think people will value it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that anyway, I don't know. But I pulled one little example of her work out that I thought I would share with you. And I will tell
Mm-hmm.
you, it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny example
Please
of what
do.
she was doing, if you would like to see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Please do.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so like I was saying, you can see here, this is what we would call canon 2. This is the standard Greek gematria values. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not actually ordinal values 1 through 24. That's another canon that I know Ellen called canon 3 or canon 1.
Okay.
And then Ellen even discovered a third canon that they were obviously using, that I don't think anyone else is aware of. But in this one, you can see we go through the ordinal numbers to 10, and then it skips and we'll go by 10s, 10, 20,
Right.
30, 40. And
Yeah.
then here we skip 90. And so anyway, so those are the values. And these are obviously the Greek alphabet, which
Mm-hmm.
has 24
Mm-hmm.
letters. So now you may or may not be aware that there's a legendary motto that was said to have hung over Plato's Academy.
Mm-hmm.
And the translation on it is something like,
Yeah.
let none without knowledge of geometry enter here. And so this is the Greek motto. This is it written out in Greek. And
Mm-hmm.
so it would be ageomot tratos medis esito. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
now you can see how they were playing with the numerical values of the characters here. So what we
Mm-hmm.
have is a little puzzle. So we've got the Greek alphabet run forward, alpha, beta, gamma, and so on to omega. At the
Mm-hmm.
bottom, you can see we have the same Greek alphabet run backwards. Now here
Yeah.
you have the motto, the famous legendary motto, and we have it written out.
Mm-hmm.
Now we take the letters. Let's take first, if you take the letters that match and just look at them. So you have these two alphas here that match.
Mm-hmm.
The two sigmas and the two omegas. And then you take the letter that's left behind. So you
Okay.
have these three letters that are left behind, and they add up to 809, which happens to be the number for Eudoxus.
Okay.
And I don't have this written out in the Greek and tabled out for you, but I obviously could. Then we'll go the other way. You have the letters that match going this way, and then the odd man out here, theta being equal to 100, nu being equal to 40, and you get 140, which is the number for hedone, meaning pleasure, equals 140. Now, Eudoxus was very famous he was also a philosopher, not just a mathematician. He was very famous for making the statement that pleasure is the highest good. So here you can see that Plato is honoring Eudoxus in the motto itself.
Wow, great.
And of course, Eudoxus was a famous geometer, and he was credited with having discovered the long a long period where the different moon cycles would all become commensurate. Like if you start different moon cycles at the same time, how many moon cycles it would take for them all to become commensurate. There's a long cycle that's 344.98 years that Eudoxus is credited with discovering. So he was well honored for that.
Yeah.
But anyway, you see here that Plato is honoring Eudoxus with the motto over his academy. And there's a lot more to it. Like I said, please understand that this is just a tiny, tiny fraction of what she has.
But fascinating. Wow. And will there be a time that you will be sharing this material, or because you seem to be a person well versed in this material, the Greek alphabet, and being introduced into ancient Greek, you seem to be a very fitting person to be able to understand what she was doing.
Well, I spent a lot of time with Ellen talking about her work. And so I wish I would have had more time to spend talking to her about it, but I would like to get this work out there. So part of we're trying to figure out what's the best way to do that. What makes the most sense. You know, I'm just not sure exactly how to do that. And one of the reasons that I'm not sure is the same reason that stumped Ellen, which is, you know, she has notebooks absolutely filled with this exact type of thing that will just blow your mind 100 times over again. But the problem is it's also interrelated with itself. So for example, with those numbers that I just showed you there, like the number 140, for example, I could take that one number and then also show you 50 more things about it and what Plato and Eudoxus were doing with that number and how it ties in with the Pythagorean mathematics as well. And so it's very much like a three-dimensional puzzle. And so it very much feels like, how would you take a three-dimensional puzzle and put it on a piece of paper and write about it on a piece of paper? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
It's a challenging problem. And it's a problem that Ellen had, you know, I mean, so many of the recorded conversations that I have with her about her work are talking about like an outline of like how you would flow from one aspect to the next aspect to the next aspect and how that flows out. And so I wanted to give you that little sneak peek, and I'm hoping that I can come up with a couple more little sneak peeks just so that people can understand a little bit about what it is.
Yeah, great.
But beyond that, you know, one of my long-term goals with Project Hindsight is I would like to find a Greek translator to work with, because we both know that Bob himself had some wishes for his translations that he was not able to complete. And I'd love to complete those, you know, essentially like going back through all of the old translations that he had done and updating them with what he eventually settled on as his translation conventions. I would love to find somebody to partner with on that. And another long-term goal is I would love to find somebody to partner with in terms of helping to get Ellen's work into a proper narrative format.
Right, great.
I don't, you know, I don't need to do that work all by myself. And, you know, I intend to sort of surround myself as I move forward. I feel like I'm very new to this role. Even though it's been a year since Ellen died, I've been very much in sort of operating in a field of grief, and it's a process to transition.
I understand. Yeah. So how did this work? Because at the time you were not familiar with astrology, as you said, and then you were suddenly introduced sort of in the astrological community. So how did that go for you? Was it really strange, or how did you experience that, the astrological scene, so to speak?
Yeah, so what I've done, I don't know how much I've launched or not launched, but because mostly I'm focusing on sort of what needs to happen first. One of the things that the estate attorney spoke with me about very shortly after Ellen died is that my primary objective is to secure the assets. That's actually your role when you're the personal representative on an estate. And, you know, that I think that really resonated with me, that that has to come first, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so very much what I'm focusing on is making sure that things are secure. And I'm still working on that. So like, it's very boring stuff. You know, it's like taking hard drives and taking them to the store and having them, taking them to the computer store and having them copied so that, you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
I have copies of everything everywhere. And, you know, like, for example, we had a new roof put on the house because
Yeah. Yeah.
it had water leaking through, and just very mundane,
Mm-hmm.
non-glamorous items of just sort of battening down the
Preservation.
hatches, right, and figuring out what's there and how best to preserve it, and
Mm-hmm.
understanding, you know, making sure that I know where everything is, what everything is. And then we had this really shocking experience of having the projecthindsight.com domain stolen.
Wow.
It was stolen by a cyber criminal and then sold to a third party, somebody who had an interest in owning it. And that was just really sort of yanked me out of my personal sphere and like into, you know, it's like realizing not only do I have to preserve this legacy, I
Mm-hmm.
really have to protect it too. And
Right.
so, in fact, I had to hire a intellectual property attorney. And as it turns out, it's a crime to hold somebody else's domain if it's
Okay.
their trademark. So, for example, Project Hindsight is my trademark.
Right.
Um, and so nobody else can own that, whether they bought it from a third party or not. It's called cyber squatting, and it actually has like $100,000 penalty that comes with it. And so my lawyer was very good, and we were able to settle that case. And the conditions of that
Okay.
settlement are confidential,
Mm-hmm.
but that experience really helped me understand that I have to be out in front, and that I have to make sure that I'm really um, like I said, protecting the
Yeah.
legacy,
Yeah. Yeah.
not just
Right.
preserving it. And so as far as the astrological scene, my hope is that people will come find me
Mm-hmm.
because you know, I, like you said, I'm not familiar with the landscape. I'm so glad to be in contact with you and other people that have reached out to me. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the projects that I'm working on is reaching, you know, trying to incorporate Ellen and Bob's circle, make sure that anyone that was in their circle, you know, that I transfer over to the new
Mm-hmm.
iteration of Project Hindsight circle as well. And
Yeah.
I'm not even halfway through that. There's people on that list that they are on my list of people that I am going to reach out to and get a hold
Right.
of. But I'm also totally open to people getting a hold of me as
Yeah.
well. And a lot of people have. And I think
Oh, that's great.
a lot of young astrologers are really interested in Robert Schmidt's
Wow.
work. And I think because you can feel the authenticity of it, and you can feel um, by taking yourself through the hard slog sometimes of what his lectures are, you can kind
Mm-hmm.
of get really the sense of what that restoration looked like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
I did, we do have a streaming website where people can subscribe, and they can listen to Bob's lectures. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
some John and Tara Bachland had set that up for Ellen after Bob had passed, and that was really helpful to
Yeah.
Ellen. Um, and I have, let me see if I can share the screen again, because I would like to show your listeners
Mm-hmm.
how I've organized it according to time period, because
Oh,
the
great.
feedback that I was getting from a lot of people was, well, what's the dates on these lectures? What was done when? And
Mm-hmm.
because it's so voluminous, the amount
Yeah.
that he has. I'm sorry, I'm slow.
No, that's no problem.
I have to go. Okay, desktop. Let's try this. Okay. Can you see where it says Robert Schmidt Astrology, the website?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I'm seeing it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So what I just want to show, one of the things that I've worked on just recently is, so here's the subscription tiers.
Oh, yeah.
You have the all access pass, and then quintessential Schmidt, which is what are widely considered to be the most quintessential lectures to start with. We wanted to make that really, really affordable for people. But then here we have the courses sort of separated out by era. So I have the early years, restoring the lost art, and then discovering the esoteric roots of Western astrology, which is the later work. So then people can sort of look through, like, let's say, for example, you're interested in just like the nuts and bolts of Hellenistic astrology, you know, that would be in this period.
Yeah.
You know, and then here's the choices. And then
great.
Yeah, okay. So, and then I'll end share. It's a pretty easy website to navigate, but it was just a little bit of a hodgepodge. So that's why I wanted to separate it out like that. And I feel
Looks
like
really good. Yeah.
Okay.
I like the photos also of the mansion and
I
Bob
know.
working on it.
That's
They're
been really
cute.
fun.
Yeah,
the whiteboard. Yeah. So I'm trying to think. So you were saying, what am I working on? I had written a little note here. So let's see. Well, and then of course you're a part of my advisory group, which has been a really important part to what I said. I want to surround myself by people who consider themselves to be very familiar with Bob's work. And, you know, I very much want to have help and input. And I think there's a community around Project Hindsight, and I don't have any interest in letting that go. I want to keep the people. So as far as like my plans, so I consider my number one goal is to make, Robert Schmidt's work available to people that are interested in it. And that sounds really simple, but in fact, I would say that they have had an accessibility problem for sure, at least over the last like 10 years. People, they were kind of very insulated and like I said, just really keeping it to their inner circle. And I do think that there's a huge opportunity to make Bob's work more available, because I think people are interested and just haven't known how to find it. And even though that there's a massive amount of content on the streaming site, that's 100% not everything. So one of the things that I'm working on is getting his previously published lectures, at least, all on the streaming site. That's really important. So there's a lot on there, but there's a lot that's not on there either. So that's like number one, I want to make the work available. And one of the things that I've done too is started a YouTube channel. So I want to upload some things onto there. There's a few things on there already. I want to upload more things. So just to make it findable, accessible, findable. And then number two, I want to republish things that have gone out of print. They have print publications, as you know, there's the 16-volume translation set. I think those definitely have an accessibility problem. I've seen them on sale on like books for like extremely high prices. There's obviously a need, a desire, a market, whatever you want to call it. So I need to get those sort of back in circulation. And then of course there's Definitions and Foundations that was published in 2009. And and then in 2005, there was a book called The Source Book, which I don't think was widely distributed, but I think should be. So I need to do that. And other print publications too that may be lesser known. There was Phase Watch. I know Ellen was very much interested in getting that republished. And then and so on and so on. And then let's see. And number three is getting Ellen's work and also unpublished work of Bob's out there. And again, that's more of a long-term goal for me, because I need to think about what the best way is to do that and how I can really do justice to the work. I don't want to just throw something out there that's not proper, but at the same time, I definitely want. And
my mouth is watering when you talk about all the stuff that's still there and not yet known to the greater public. That's really, I'm fascinated with it. So yeah, that Let it come. And I really like the idea that you want to do the retranslations that Bob was planning for instance, the
I
books
would
of
love
Veges
that.
Valens. That would be really amazing because he developed so much uh, astrological new jargon, new words for everything. And then he started doing that. I listened to the talk, the house conversation he had, and there he also produced some of the new translations, which made so much sense because they were, then he understood what he was
Yeah.
actually translating, and that was really amazing. Yeah, really
I
great
absolutely loved
stuff.
that talk. When I was listening to that talk, it was like I just remember feeling like I was on the edge of my seat. I absolutely loved that talk.
Yeah,
But
it's
it's such,
great.
I mean, that talk in particular is such a window into his mind, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah.
I mean, and one
It-
of the things that just delights me about that and other talks is like I think about um like no, normal people when we're developing a concept or thinking something through. I almost imagine it like you're braiding, you're like you're weaving threads, right? So you take
mm-hmm.
threads and braid them in, and maybe you braid in like 3 threads or 4 threads, whereas Bob would take like the next thing you know, you'd be on like the 15th thread or the 16th thread, and he just makes this gorgeous weaving with so many more threads than you could have ever imagined could have gone into one
Right.
concept.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah. Oh,
it's
really
like,
amazing. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
it's really I can't thank him enough because in my own development as an astrologer, I went back through time because I got disappointed with modern astrology, and then I went back to uh, Renaissance astrology, William Lilly and all that stuff. Morin de Villefranche is a really good astrologer, but I grew dissatisfied, and I started studying with Robert Zoller, which is medieval astrology, and I landed finally with Robert and his Hellenistic Greek astrology, and
okay,
that
I didn't realize
and
that.
yeah, and that really put me back because when I discarded Jungian astrology, I also sort of lost the esoteric background or the psychological deep background of astrology, and what I was left was mere techniques.
Yeah,
For instance, Robert Zoller is a great astrologer, but medieval astrology, for this task, you do this method. This
right.
technique is for this topic. So, and it's all simply building stones. It's like Lego, you build something up by means of separate specific things, and you lose the oversight of all the broader context. And Bob really put that back into vision for me when he was talking about Plato. I had heard of Plato, but never knew him. And well, it's really great to meet Plato in astrology because it's such a deep
Yeah,
layer of astrology. And it was so nice to hear Bob admitting that finally he was convinced himself that it was really there, the Platonic background, even though it was not that obvious. But when he accepted that, all sort of things fell into place for him, which was really another revelation for him, but it was also a revelation for me, meeting Plato in astrology. Really great stuff. Yeah. So, yeah, bring
yeah,
it on.
yeah. Yeah, and I was thinking like getting back to Ellen's work too, and part of what their later discoveries were, both of them, is this idea like the Pythagoreans are famous for having said all is number.
hmm
And it's known that they said that, but very little is known what they were actually doing with their mathematics, even though we know that they said that, and we know about Tetractys and a few other things.
It
But
was it Jacob Klein who said that was not correct. He said that they said everything can be counted.
okay, I did
That's
not
what
know that.
Robert Schmidt said in one of his lectures.
I don't. I didn't. I was not aware of that.
Well, that's
Huh.
interesting, but go on,
That
go on.
is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, so one of the things that I talked to Ellen about is that, modern people think about number as being very abstract, as something really removed from the natural
hmm
world.
hmm
We recognize number in terms of the Fibonacci sequence, or like the golden mean, right?
Yeah.
1.618, I think it is. We know that number exists in nature, but with that, maybe a couple other exceptions. I think modern people generally view number as being sort of divorced from the natural
Mm-hmm,
world
mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm.
life in general or something like that. But that's
Yeah.
very much not how the Pythagoreans thought about it. It's not how the Greeks thought about it. They thought that the numbers that showed up in the natural world were meaningful, and it was meaningful that they were those were the numbers that they were. And so it was very important to them to honor that and to again embed that into their system. And that's the exciting work that they were
Yeah.
doing in
Wow.
their later time. And honestly, I'm surprised that more people weren't beating down their door in those later years to find out what they were up to. It's like,
Yeah, yeah. That's a pity, but it's also great that the material is still there. And I can't thank you enough for doing this work because, well, this material needs to get out there simply because it's so fundamental for understanding astrology, but also, as you said, the esoteric background of
it's so
astrology.
important.
That's
Yeah.
really important work. Yeah. So thank
Yeah.
you. Thank
You're
you.
thank you for receiving it. Thank you for like accepting my newness. It's like hashtag new job. So you had asked me.
Yeah, well, one of the questions was because were having a live, and
Yes.
then this was simply dropped in your lap, and then okay, so that must have been a shocker, sort of.
Yes, yes. So I have a thriving client practice that I
Mm-hmm.
currently have sort of backburnered right now. So
Okay. All right.
um I still have a few babies that I see. They're a big part of my practice, and I don't have anyone to send some people to, um but for the most part, what I'm doing is just transitioning and sort of
Mm.
backburnering that. Um, and then opening up that time that I have then to work on Project Hindsight.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Wow.
but like I had said earlier, I'm definitely welcoming help, and like moving forward, I will definitely be looking for partners as well.
Okay.
And there's
Well,
definitely people that are more familiar with certain aspects than what I am. Like you had said about the Greek, I'm familiar with Ellen's work, and
mm-hmm.
everybody that goes to St. John's takes 2 years of ancient Greek, but that is all I have taken. So
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
definitely
Okay.
want to partner with somebody who is a competent Greek translator.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
that would be really great. Yeah. So this is sort of an advert as well for people. Ring on Katie's bell when you have a big interest in whatever she was talking about now, and perhaps wanting to help as a translator, or perhaps the mathematical work. I'm not quite sure if you want to have somebody working on that as well, but
it's
yeah,
a long-term goal. Yeah, it's a
it's a
long-term
long-term
goal.
goal. Right. Great.
I'm open to how it unfolds. I'm like I said, I'm honored to be a part of this, and I trust the timing will unfold the way it needs to. I still have so
Great.
much to do that's just very mundane,